here in America somewhere. And so I'm very confident. And I believe that our Muslim American community is getting the message. You know, they know that you got to get involved. You can't stay on the sideline. You got to get engaged, and you got to be organized.
Okay, Congressman Ellison, thank you very much for your time. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam, Rabbi.
And welcome back to the World of Islam, coming to you from Manchester, New Hampshire, here in the United States of America. As we travel around America, we find that many communities are involved in interfaith dialogue. And we know that a lot of the misunderstandings about Muslims and Islam comes from people not knowing us. And it's not about that we're always trying to convert people to Islam, but at least we want people to understand us. And this reduces the level of misunderstanding and ignorance among the people. And now I've been invited to a church here, the First Congregation Church here in Manchester, New Hampshire. And I'm with Reverend Christopher J. Emerson, who is the senior pastor there. Thank you for inviting us here.
I appreciate being invited. Thank you very much.
Reverend Christopher, just tell us a bit about your church here and how it became involved in interfaith activities here in the community, and why you felt it was important that you reach out to the other faiths to make sure there was an understanding between the people here in Manchester, New Hampshire.
I've historically carried a deep concern about Christian-Jewish relations going back many, many years. And when a Jewish woman in town said, maybe it's time to really bring an interfaith group to life in Manchester, and the two of us began to work, it became obvious that a growing group in Manchester, which wasn't necessarily on our personal radar, was the Muslim community. So we initially, about 6 years ago, said we need to strengthen the community's awareness of the growing Muslim population in Manchester and Greater Manchester. And so that's exactly what we did. We began to create more interfaith opportunities, including Jews, Christians, and Muslims.
Right. Now, how long have you been here in Manchester?
I've been in this church and this town for 15 years.
For 15 years. So it was just like fairly recently that Islam kind of came up on the radar here in the...
It's true. It's true. This is a town that's very rich and very diverse in its ethnic background. And yet I will say that I was not acutely aware of a Muslim presence and of Muslim people. I mean, if you ask me intellectually, am I aware that there are, say 10 years ago, are there Muslim people in Manchester? I go, well, I suppose so. But I'm not aware personally of who they might be. And of course, since then, many have become good friends of mine.
Right.
But what we did, this Jewish woman and myself, is help to develop a group. And we wanted from the very beginning for this to have 3 feet, like a tripod. The Muslim tradition, the Jewish tradition, and the Christian tradition. And we institutionalized that, if you will, by having 3 presidents of the Interfaith Council, a Jew, a Christian, and a Muslim, so that all 3 are there. And we knew there was an imbalance. We knew there was an imbalance because this is historically, of course, a very, very Christian town. In fact, very Roman Catholic, historically. And the Jewish community has been here for a long time, but they're still very much a minority. Part of the imbalance was not simply demographic in terms of numbers. It has to do with organization. The Christian churches and communities in town have decades of being well organized. The Jewish community is better organized but doesn't have the same heft of numbers. And the Muslim community was still not as organized because there were people coming in as individuals, as families, and as is true with all ethnic and cultural and religious groups, they don't tend to be organized when they arrive. Organization takes time. So that as we wanted to draw the Jewish, Christian, and Muslim communities together, we found that it was more difficult to reach individuals or families or groups within the Muslim population. So we knew that it was going to take time to reach people, appeal to people, and also, to be very honest, dispel any concerns on the part of Muslims as to whether or not our enterprise was safe. It goes both ways.
But let me ask you, I mean, do you have any practical examples how somebody might think it would not be safe to enter into a dialogue or come to the church and sit with you?
I do indeed. It was about 6 years ago, 5 or 6 years ago. And a group that we had in the church, once we started to open our eyes to the various groups moving into Manchester, you need to know that Manchester is a resettlement center.
What does that mean, resettlement
center? It means that the federal government deliberately and in great numbers resettles refugees in Manchester. This is not something Manchester has voted in favor of. It's something the government has said will happen. 2 blocks from here is the International Institute, which is the first place where immigrants, but particularly refugees, would come. And they would be resettled here. And we have had thousands come into this community, more than almost any other area. And the diversity of Manchester has grown exponentially, amazingly. And one of the populations which has come in is Bosnian Muslims. Starting, I don't know how many years ago, but we saw so many more Bosnian Muslims in town, and we thought maybe one thing we could do is create a hospitality event. We'll take 25 of our Christian folk from this church and invite 25 Bosnian Muslims to come, gather in a back room here, have some natural food, and just say welcome to Manchester. And invite a few folks selected to simply talk about where they came from culturally. Not necessarily to get into the more delicate religious or political issues, just to say, I came from Bosnia. This was the plan. The problem was that 2 days before the event, one of the elderly senior members of the Bosnian community told the rest of his community, do not go inside that church. They will close the doors and kill you. Which was his experience in Bosnia. The Christians were engaged in a war with his people. He carried that fear and suspicion into this country. The event never happened. But what I realized in that moment was that one of our challenges for this church and for interfaith relations in town in general was to create an environment and an expectation and an experience of hospitality and safety for everybody. For everybody. After 9/11, of course, many Christians get very nervous about Muslims.
Well, let me ask you that. I mean, did you find that from your congregation that a lot of people wanted to know more about Islam or had questions about Islam? And did you find that the basis of whatever their fears or misconception was just based on the fact they didn't know anything about Islam and Muslims?
It's true. Ignorance can be very dangerous. And a person who is ignorant, or I'd rather say uninformed, a person who is uninformed can be prey to certain media images and certain caricatures and stereotypes that are not well founded.
But I have to differentiate it, because there are people who are uninformed and people who are ignorant.
Yes.
I say people who are ignorant who formed an opinion even though they know they're uninformed. And there are people who are uninformed who will tell you, I don't have an opinion because I'm uninformed.
It's a good distinction. I buy your distinction completely. And so therefore we have people who are both uninformed and others who are ignorant. Fair?
Right.
All right. So in any case, after 9/11, it became very obvious that we had people here who were ignorant but had certain prejudices in place. People who were uninformed and wanted to be informed. And people who just said, we have Muslims in Manchester? Who knew? So we had a whole range of reactions of people from this church and from the community. And it added a certain impetus to interfaith relations for understanding and for learning and for education. And the piece that I care the most about is that we develop positive relationships, person to person, man to man, woman to woman, in our community, because that to me is the basis. It's the foundation for learning. I will learn more about Islam if I care about you as a man. All of a sudden I care. It's not an academic subject, it's you. And so if we can develop relationships that are genuine, generous, and authentic, it creates an environment within which we want to learn. And in that environment, prejudices and stereotypes, which can prevail in ignorance, can also be dislodged. And people might say, as I've heard them say, well, I didn't know that. I didn't know that. That means I might have to change my mind. I might have to think again. So that to me, hospitality and safety in a building like this is a crucial beginning for any kind of interfaith